Awesome. All righty. So let's pick up where we left off. We're in the chapter 2 Wives, and today, this is my goal, this is my hope, please stick with me, that we will wrap up this chapter. And honestly, what we're coming into with this part of the chapter is, for me at least personally, some of the most exciting directions that there are into wives. And so where we're just going to pick right up is on page 116. And it's the second full paragraph, about middle of the page, we have elsewhere remarked. So page 116, second full paragraph, we have elsewhere remarked. So it says, we have elsewhere remarked how much better life is lived on a spiritual plane. What does it mean to live life on a spiritual plane? To live these 12 steps as a way of life, to work these 12 steps as a way of life. That's what we're talking about. And it says, if God can solve, because God is the solution. Oh, page 116. Absolutely. Also, that's the thing I forgot to mention. I love questions. I love comments. You're very welcome. If you have any of those, pop them in the chat. I will answer them. I will go on tangents. I'm easily distracted, but I think that's fun for everyone. So join us. All right. So, so it goes on to say, if God can solve the age-old riddle of alcoholism, he can solve your problems too. And man, it is really early for me to be big book bouncing around. But when it says we have elsewhere remarked how much better life is when lived on a spiritual plane, and that idea that God can solve whatever problem that I have, where does it talk about that in the big book? Well, we can make a note to see page 13, and then a note to see page 42. And then I figure what we'll do is probably go see page 13, and then go see page 42. So bear with me. Let's go to the very, very, very bottom of page 13, last paragraph. It says, my friend promised. Now, this is Abby Thatcher promising Bill Wilson, bottom of page 13. When these things were done, the things that were done were these 12 steps. I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living. Oh man, it's going to be a way of life. That sounds like a lot of work, but one that answered all my problems. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're at the bottom of page 13, but actually we're going to pop over all my problems. We're going to pop over to page 42. So glad you're here bouncing around. So at the very bottom of page 42, now this is our friend Fred. So Fred, you know, he's the guy, he went out of town, started drinking. There wasn't a cloud on the horizon. He started drinking and then went on quite a bender where a taxi cab driver was driving him around for a week. That would be an expensive bill. Just want to point that out. But the very, very, very bottom, page 42, quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems, all my problems. And so when we pop back to page 116, what we're going to see, we're getting into just one of my favorite parts of this chapter, where it's like the suggestion is, if there is somebody in my life that is suffering from this illness, if there is a human being who is suffering in my life, and I can't carry this message to them in the way that I would sitting down with a newcomer, the best thing that I could do is work this program. We're getting into the work these steps suggestion of 2 wives, and it's great. Let's continue. So back on page 16 or 116, sorry. It says, we wives have found that like everybody else. So some of these things, these characteristics, which of course are a lot like us, but these characteristics are characteristics that are human characteristics. And I can ask myself, hey, have I been afflicted with these characteristics, regardless of whether I would consider myself the Al-Anon or not? Have I been afflicted with pride? Do I got some ego? Have I been afflicted with self-pity? Oh, you bet I have. What about vanity? Now that vanity, some of you guys might be like, how long have you been wearing that sweater? Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to. For me, that vanity isn't that type of vanity, but do I have that ego and image maintenance? Do I have to protect what I think you think of me, which is often very different than what you actually think of me? Do I have that vanity? And then it says, and all the things which go to make up the self-centered person. And we were not above selfishness or dishonesty. As our husbands began to apply spiritual principles in their lives, we began to see the desirability of doing so too. Again, if I'm here for me, if I'm here for my alcoholism, my addiction, my compulsive behavior, and I'm worried that people are on my back being a neg, what is the best thing that I can do? Well, a direction is for me to work these steps. Again, really hammering home, regardless of who I am coming to this study, regardless of the angle at which I'm taking this chapter, I got to do these steps. Darn it. But good news is we're going to see the results of these steps, and we're going to see another description of a spiritual awakening. And it says, at first, some of us did not believe we needed this help. We thought on the whole we were pretty good women, capable of being nicer if our husbands stopped drinking. Do I withhold love? I will offer you love. I will offer you I will offer you compassion if you change. Is that something that I do, regardless of who I am reading this book? Because that's what it is. I'll be nicer if you change first. Have I been afflicted with that belief? And it says, but it was a silly idea that we were too good to need God. Now we try to put spiritual principles. Again, what are spiritual principles? These 12 steps, that's what spiritual principles are. The actions of these steps to work in every department of our lives. Sounds like it tells me to do that in step 12, practicing these principles in all my affairs. Man, sounds like I got to do this in every area of my life, even on the back roads or the major highway. We were talking, one of the people who was driving, and we were talking about that. Yeah, even as you drive, please drive safe. All right. So it says, when we do that, we find it solves our problems too. The reality is, whether I think it or not, whether I believe it or not, what I found to be true is that all my problems are spiritual. And that is why these spiritual principles work on all my problems. Welcome to those who've just joined. We're at the very bottom of page 116. And this is it. So for those that have been coming to this study, you know that I like to find sneaky descriptions of a spiritual awakening. I like to, oh, that's a spiritual awakening. And I joke about how we're not going to go to this spiritual appendix. We're going to find it here. We did go to the spiritual appendix. I promise we did. But here is a description of a spiritual awakening, because it's talking about what happens when we apply these 12 steps in our lives. It says the ensuing lack of fear, worry, and hurt feelings is a wonderful thing. For those of us who have taken these actions, who have recovered, has this been my experience? Thank goodness. If it's not, that's okay. It just tells us we've got a little bit of work to do. And what we're going to see is that it does not take long to get well. And it says, we urge you to try our program for nothing. So work the steps, because nothing will be so helpful to your husband or the person that we want to get well as the radically changed attitude toward him, which God will show you how to have. See, I can't change my mind about people. You know, in step 4, we talked about how I can't overcome resentments on my own. I can't overcome defects on my own. I can't see people in a new way on my own. I need to take the actions of these steps, and the God of my understanding can then work in my life. That's my experience. So God is showing me how to see them in a radically different way. And it says, go along with your husband with the steps. We're not just saying agree to everything our spouse says. For those of you that are married, you're like, or in a relationship, absolutely not. Go along with the person who's working the steps. If you possibly can, dive into this work ourselves. And now we transition into the assumption that the alcoholic has recovered, that the addict has recovered. So this is where we're transitioning, and we're seeing some different suggestions and some different struggles that we're going to see. And a lot of those struggles we're going to pick up again in the next chapter, The Family Afterward. So If you and your husband find a solution, and I want to emphasize a solution. We have a chapter. There is a solution. We have one. Hi, buddy. This is absolutely the best time for a cuddle. I'm not in the middle of anything. So a solution for the pressing problem of drink. We are recovered. We are not cured. It says, of course, you are going to be very happy, but all problems will not be solved at once. And what we see is really where two things are true, where there's the duality of, yes, we have sudden and spectacular and powerful recoveries, deep and effective spiritual awakenings, and life still happens, and there is still difficulties. And so it says all problems will not be solved at once. Seed has started to sprout in new soil, but growth has only begun. And a lot of what I'm doing when I'm working with other people is I'm planting seeds. And it's an important reminder that a seed has everything that it needs to grow, everything that it needs to grow. All it needs to find is good soil. What's good soil? Willingness. If that seed finds willingness, and even if it doesn't, one of the things, like it just in my experience, just because I do not see the immediate results of my 12-step work or my 12-step effort, does not mean something has not happened. What happens when you plant a seed? Once a seed is planted, and I know we got some gardeners here, once a seed is planted, its early growth happens underground. It grows roots before it begins to sprout. So just because I'm only seeing just the start of progress does not mean that progress has not begun. And it says, in spite of your newfound happiness, there will be ups and downs. Many of the old problems will still be with you. And I love this. This is as it should be. I think I'm living the spiritual life. Everything should be easy breezy, lemon squeezy. You know, what do you mean? What do you mean life is occurring? This is rude and uncalled for. I'm not perpetually getting my way after I decided I ought not try to get my way. Ridiculous, right? This is as it should be. See, whenever I'm experiencing troubles and difficulties, again, we're going to read about this in the next chapter. They become opportunities for spiritual growth, opportunities to dive in and live this way of life and practice these steps. And it says the faith and sincerity of both you and your husband will be put to the test. Who is it the most difficult to practice spiritual principles with? Our family. Our loved ones, those that we're closest to. Yeah, that's who it's most difficult with. These workouts should be regarded as part of your education, for thus you will be learning to live. I don't know about you, but maybe y'all are way more spiritual than I am, but I am riddled with this defect called perfectionism. I also got some black and white thinking. I think I got to do everything perfectly. I think Saint Paige of her Holy Order of Capes needs to show up and manage everything perfectly. No. See, I am learning through my mistakes. I will make mistakes. And that's the thing. It says, if you are in earnest, so if you are sincere about doing this, working these steps, living this way of life, practicing inventory, practicing amends, practicing this work, they will not drag you down. Instead, you will capitalize them. So the worst things I've ever done become the gifts and blessings that I can use to help somebody else. Capitalize them. Even the little stuff. Man, when I sit down with a sponsee and we're doing inventory, you know, actually never have I been like, I don't relate to that resentment at all. No. What is helpful? When I'm able to be like, yes, me too. Oh man, I've done that. I've inventoried that. And I can share my experience. A better way of life will emerge when they are overcome. Again, for those that have been with us, way of life, that is something we continue to emphasize, that this is not a set it and forget it program. I'm never done. But a better way of life will emerge when they're overcome, when I'm continuing to seek God's will in all that I do. And here are some difficulties that we have to and get to overcome. Some of the snags you will encounter are irritation, hurt feelings, and resentments. Sounds accurate, right? I think I did some inventory. I made some amends. I should be perfectly free from resentments and irritation and hurt feelings. Nope, I get to continue to grow. And it says your husband will sometimes be unreasonable. That's me. I am sometimes unreasonable. And you will want to criticize. That's also me. I often want to criticize. Yep. And it says, starting from a speck on the domestic horizon, great thunderclouds of dispute may gather. Anyone who's in a relationship relate to that speck that turns into thunderclouds, that little argument about the socks that turns into this, like, we need a divorce, that. Yeah, that's part of this thing. That's a part of human beings and having relationships. And it says these family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband, especially to those of us who will relapse if we are not free of resentment. And it says, often you must carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. And this is one of those things I was joking about before. Do not take that line to your spouse and be like, this is your responsibility. Absolutely not. No, if I am reading this book, if I am reading this chapter, if I'm practicing these principles, I have the tools. Even if I don't have all of them, even if I'm new to this thing and I'm just starting to practice them, I'm the one with the tools. And if I'm the one with the tools, it is my responsibility to use them. So regardless of whether or not I'm the quote unquote spouse or the wife or the husband, if I'm the alcoholic or I'm the addict or I'm the untreated Al-Anon, regardless of who I am, it is my responsibility to watch out for those domestic specks. And it says, and this is important, for regardless of who I am, never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to an alcoholic. See, often what I might want to do is minimize and say, no, it's not a resentment. I'm just a little frustrated. Or no, it's not a resentment. It's this or that. No, a resentment is a deadly hazard. See, I cannot live in resentment and live in the sunlight of the Spirit. And so, regardless of who I am, it is my responsibility to deal with, to manage, and to turn to God with each and every one of my resentments. To use the tools that we have. What is the first initial tool that we have? Inventory. We also have prayer. Eventually, once we've done the prayer and inventory, we realize we owe an amends. So that's another tool, just throwing that out. Solitary self-appraisal isn't sufficient, taking it to someone else, right? And it says that we do not mean you have to disagree with your husband whenever there is an honest difference of opinion. This is the direction. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. Imagine how our home life might be if I could do it without a resentful, critical spirit, to disagree without being disagreeable. Imagine how my home group business meetings might be if I could show up in that way, right? That way. So let's pop over to top page of 118. Let me know if this is your experience too. You and your husband will find that you can dispose of serious problems easier than you can trivial ones. Often I was making the joke last week, often it's the stubbed toe, not the broken leg, that gets me. And it says, next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile and say, now this is key. This key to the kingdom right here with this direction. Very hard to utilize, especially when it starts to get heated, but the privilege to say, this is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. See, if it's getting heated, I'm participating in the heated. So I got to own mine, got to clean up my side of the street. Let's talk about it later. And what an incredible, powerful tool to pause and then in that pause, take spiritual actions before we come back to it. Welcome, glad you're here. We're on top page 118, rocking and rolling. And so it's just, man, that is so practical and so useful and so not easy. And this is what we're talking about with this spiritual way of life is a way of life. This is a spiritual practice. It takes practice. Also, kind of tying into some of those earlier paragraphs where it's like, if things are smooth sailing, I don't get those opportunities to practice, right? That idea that rough seas make skilled sailors. So the more that I practice, the more I'm able to really utilize these tools. So it says, if your husband is trying to live on a spiritual basis, really actively working these steps, he will also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention, to avoid those heated arguments. So you know that thing that I said earlier where it doesn't matter who you are, if I'm reading this book, these tools, they apply to me, I've got to live them. That's what it's saying. So even do not go to your spouse or partner and be like, you need to avoid contention and argument. No, I need to. All right. And now this next paragraph just ties in so beautifully. Now we're just, for the sake of time, we're not going to read all of page 82 and 83, but the principles of page 82 and 83 were, so you can make a little note, page 82, 83, if you're writing in your book. And what we're talking about on page 82 and 83 are the directions and the descriptions on how to make amends in a romantic partnership, in a relationship, and those directions that follow, like, okay, yeah, there's been no infidelity, I haven't cheated, but still, how do I make amends? And we're going to see in this brief paragraph mirroring those directions. So it says, your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. Keep in mind, on 82, it's going to say, we think as a man is unthinking when he says sobriety is enough, right? And it gives us the whole metaphor of the tornado roaring through, the cyclone cellar, and I've uprooted things. So sobriety is just me stopping blowing spiritually, right? That's all it is. So I owe my loved ones, I owe my family members more than sobriety. He wants to make good. What does it mean to make good? Set right the wrong, which is to amend. And here's where it's to say, okay, let's be a little realistic, yet you must not expect too much. Let us not go to our spouse and partner and be like, girl, lower your expectations. No, that is not how we approach this. But it says, his ways of thinking and doing are the habits of years. And it says, patience, tolerance, and understanding and love are the watchwords. Make a little note of those watchwords, because we will pop back to 83 because I want to show you a prayer. It says, but I'll finish the paragraph first. So patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. See, earlier we were talking about, do I withhold love? Hey, I will be nice to you. I will be kind to you. I will be patient with you if you change first. Now I've got to change. I've got to show these things, demonstrate these things. And with consistency, they will be reflected back. And it says, live and let live is the rule. You know the interesting thing about that? In Al-Anon, they love the slogans. They've got all the slogans, and in their book, they have, hold on, give me one sec. There's a great IP in Al-Anon called Detachment. It's a two-sided leaflet that really explains the 3 C's for those living with and or affected or impacted by alcoholics. And yes, I love these 3 C's. You didn't create it. You can't control it. And you can't cure it. It is up to them, which would be the alcoholic, the addict, those who are suffering. And actually, we're going to tie into those three C's in like 2 paragraphs. So absolutely. Yeah, it's great timing. I'm here for this. But it says, live and let live is the rule. And so in Al-Anon, they have this book, and they write descriptions and all these slogans, one of them being live and let live. Often, I will focus on the let live, right? Go, it's none of my business what they do, like keep to my side of the street. But there's a direction. It is Live and let live. Go live my life. Go have a full, beautiful, wonderful life. Live the spiritual way of life. Have that light shine. Find joy in life. And then let them have their own life. It's not my business. Absolutely. Live and let live. And it says, if you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, not point out theirs, remedy my own, inventory amends, that process, there will be little need to criticize each other. Now, when I said patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords, let's pop over to page 83 just for a second. Woo! And for those that are just kind of coming, it's like, man, why does page bounce around in Two Wives so much? I just want to point out the reason I love page 83, and we're going to do the very first full paragraph, so I'll give you a sec to find it. But the reason I bounce around so much is often in this chapter, we have these old ideas and these preconceived notions, and we read the chapter Two Wives through this lens, but we miss the directions, and the directions are seen throughout the book. So I bounce around to kind of point out, hey, it was saying that earlier, hey, it's saying that here. It's just as valid here. So when it says, yes, there is a long period of reconstruction ahead, top 83. We must take the lead. That's me. I'm reading the book. I got to take the lead. A remorseful mumbling that we are sorry won't fill the bill at all. We ought to sit down with the family and frankly analyze the past as we now see it. What we're talking about is owning our defects of character, owning our mistakes, owning our harms. And it says being very careful not to criticize them. Here's how we know the book meets us where we're at. Their defects may be glaring and then takes us to where we need to go. But chances are that our own actions are partially responsible. Oh man, yeah, accurate. And it says, so we clean house with the family. And here's the prayer. Asking each morning in meditation. So anytime in this book, it says we ask. And also it implies that we have a morning meditation practice. That's not optional either. That our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. So if I'm struggling with these things, what can I do? Is I can take to prayer, Creator, show me the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. And I just think that's a cool little tie-in. So I just wanted to tie it in. All right. So let's pop over to back over to page 118. Thanks for bouncing around with me, you guys. And so it says, we women carry with us the picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. I'm sure no one here has ever had this perfect ideal of who we think our partner needs to be, or anyone in our life needs to be for them to make us happy, right? I'm sure no one relates to that. And it says it is the most natural thing in the world. Once his liquor problem is solved, we can be in a place of recovered, solved. To feel that he will now measure up to that cherished vision. Chances are he will not. For like yourself, he is just beginning his development, just beginning this spiritual way of life. And so that's one of the things is genuinely like working with people and working with people whose spouses or partners come into recovery. It can be really easy to be like, man, they're sober, they're sponsoring others, they've made amends, but why do they still do that, right? This is a lifelong process. And also this is like everything to do with Al-Anon and everything to do with my need to treat my own codependency. It's none of my business who God has called someone to be, because God has called them to be exactly who they need to be, not necessarily for me. Because the people in my life, I have them in my life and I'm like, it's for me. No, they have their own higher power. They have their own God of their own understanding. And so now is where we get into another kind of difficulty, another struggle that a lot of people do struggle with in Al-Anon and those who maybe don't find their way to Al-Anon. Another feeling that we are likely to entertain is one of resentment. That love and loyalty could not cure our husbands of alcoholism. And this is a really important step one information as well. The love of family is not enough to keep me sober. The loyalty of wonderful people in my life is not enough to keep me sober. It's not enough. It says, we do not like the thought that the contents of a book, this book, which contains the precise directions on how to get well and stay well, as well as or the work of another alcoholic, has accomplished in a few weeks that which we struggled with for years. I want to point something out. A few weeks. It does not take long to work these steps. It does not take long to have a spiritual experience. Man, if the fire's gone, it does not take long to dive back into this work and reignite it. It does not take long. A few weeks. Weeks. Not months, not years, weeks. And it says, at such moments, we forget that alcoholism is an illness over which we could not possibly have had any power. I am beyond human aid. And keep in mind the second pertinent idea and how it works, right? A, that we're alcoholic and could not manage our own life. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. Human power. I am beyond human aid. And it says your husband will be the first to say it was your devotion and care which brought him to the point where he could have a spiritual experience. Without you, he would have gone to pieces long ago. When resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count your blessings. And what an interesting, I just find it interesting because a lot of, if you ever go to a meeting where you can pick a topic, those of you who've ever gone to those, how often, it's always gratitude, isn't it? Isn't gratitude almost always one of those topics? We just love talking about gratitude. It doesn't talk about it that much in the book though, but this is one of those places where it gives us a direction. Pause, count our blessings, pause, find the gratitude. And it says, after all, your family is reunited. Alcohol is no longer a problem, and you and your husband are working together toward an undreamed of future. What a wonderful promise that we have there. A wonderful promise that happens as the result of these steps. And still another difficulty. I also want to point out some of these difficulties we're going to really get into in the chapter Family Afterwards, because that chapter is directed to the difficulties a family faces after the spiritual awakening, after the spiritual experience. So it says still another difficulty is that you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics. You have been starving for his companionship, yet he spends long hours helping other men and their families. You feel he should now be yours. And this is important. The fact is that he should work with other people to maintain his sobriety. See, that's one of those things I always want to emphasize is sponsorship is not top tier 12 step. It is not the keener nerd part of the program. It is a minimum requirement for sobriety, for abstinence. I need to work with others. And I always tell my sponsees, if it's not inconvenient, I don't have enough sponsees. It doesn't have to be all the way inconvenient. It's got to be a little though, a little inconvenient. You know what I mean? I want to watch Netflix, but I got to help somebody with their inventory. A little inconvenient. That's how we know. I actually don't watch. I don't think I have Netflix. Anyway, sorry. That's just tangent, focus. Sometimes he will be so interested that he becomes really neglectful. And again, we're going to talk about that in the next chapter. Your house is filled with strangers. You may not like some of them. He gets stirred up about their troubles, but not at all about yours. It will do little good if you point this out and urge more attention for yourself. We find it a real mistake to dampen his enthusiasm for alcoholic work. Because that's the thing, nothing works so much as working with other alcoholics, working with other addicts, working with people who have suffered the way that I have suffered, helping them. This works. It works. It works when all other measures failed, right? And it says, you should join in his efforts as much as you possibly can. That is a direction. Go help others. If I'm feeling like, man, my partner's in the program and they're spending too much time with sponsees, go get sponsees. Do it. Dive in. And it says, we suggest that you direct some of your thought to the wives of his new alcoholic friends. They need the counsel and love of a woman who has gone through what you have. So regardless of what brings me to this chapter, what brings me to this study, I can help people who have suffered the way that I have suffered. Go help others. It says, it is probably true that you and your husband have been living too much alone, for drinking many times isolates the wife of an alcoholic. Therefore, you probably need fresh interest and a great cause to live for as much as your husband. If you cooperate rather than complain, you'll find his excess enthusiasm will tone down. And it's that idea, if I go into this way of life, rather than be like, give more attention to myself, it will naturally find its way. There's not too many people that are, sponsoring others 24/7, 365. That balance, and we'll see, there's only one place in the book where it talks about balance. Again, next chapter, not even here. The problem with balance is I want to be at the center and I want to manage it. Now, God's got to be at the center, right? Oh, excess enthusiasm will tone down. Water will find its own level. Yeah, water finds its own level. That was like in my brain, but yeah, like it will sort itself out. Welcome. We're on very bottom of page 119. We'll be turning the page to 120 here in a sec. And this I love. This is just a beautiful promise. Both of you will awaken, like a spiritual awakening. Perhaps that's my nudge, Are we talking about a spiritual awakening? Awaken to a new sense of responsibility for others. One of the most sure signs of a spiritual awakening is my desire to help share it with somebody else. You, as well as your husband, ought to think of what you can put into life instead of how much you can take out, right? And those were the directions and the suggestions given in working with others. Given, and when it's like, man, should I go to this thing or not? Think about what I can bring. And when I think about what I can give to life, what I can put into life, how I can help others, man, life takes on new meaning. And it says, inevitably, your lives will be fuller for doing so. You will lose the old life to find one much better. What a beautiful promise. That I get to lose that old way of life to find a new way of life. And I promise it is much better. And now what we're getting into, top of page 120, this is one of the only places, only one of 3 places in the book where it gives precise directions. I mean, 2, if we're going to see a vision for you, and it's going to be some loosey-goosey directions, but some precise directions on what to do if I have relapsed after coming into contact with 12 steps. These are the directions. So it says, perhaps, and so which tells us that it's actually quite rare. It's so rare we tucked it away in 2 wives, right? Because what is 12 steps? It is these 12 steps, and these 12 steps taken out of this book. That's what it is. So it says, perhaps your husband will make a fair start on a new basis. Basis is way of life. But just as things are going beautifully, he dismays you by coming home drunk. If you are satisfied that he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as has been true with many of our men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. This is the direction. Your husband will see at once that he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. That is the action. That is the direction. Redoubling my spiritual activity. See, whenever somebody relapses, we kind of want to be like, oh no, what happened? But it's never what happened. If I have an understanding of step 1 is that I will relapse. Step one is that there is nothing that I could put between me and the relapse. I am going to relapse. Step two is believing that a solution exists. So it's not what happened. It's what didn't happen. It's what did not happen to get me into that place of solution, or what stopped happening over time. And that's not a judgment. I mean, that's the thing. Relapse, and I know it can feel so guilt-ridden and so shameful, and I think I'm bad. No, it's the inevitability of somebody with an illness like this. I will relapse if I don't have the spiritual awakening. And so if one happens, or we're working with a sponsee and a sponsee happens, man, I go to 120 when this happens. We need to redouble our spiritual activities. Again, it's spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. It's not redouble focusing on work, not redouble going to the gym, not redouble necessarily spending time with family. Redouble my spiritual actions. Redouble that inventory, redouble that amends, redouble that prayer, redouble, yes, absolutely, redouble that amends, redouble working with others, redouble prayer, redouble meditation, redouble. What am I not doing? Double it, daily prayer, daily meditation, do it, right? And there's a thing in chat, and it's so true. Relapse may be the wake-up call they need. Absolutely it is. And see, that's what it's talking about when it says this is by no means a bad thing in some cases. Because often we kind of joke, half measures avail us nothing, ha ha ha. But how often do we kind of have half measures? There's things that we don't want to do, or there's things that we've left off. Goodness, it's human, it's understandable. Or there's parts of the program that I think, yeah, it's a really good idea for all you guys. I don't need to do it. I'm the exception, right? And what allows me to accept the hope that's on offer in this thing? It's coming to the end of myself. Oftentimes when I'm working with somebody and they're like, no, I don't want to do steps. I want to just go to meetings, or I want to go to treatment. Nothing wrong with meetings. It's important to go to meetings. Where else am I going to find new people to work with, right? Nothing wrong with treatment. But they want to do other things. And often it's important for me to let them. Because one of two things will happen. One, it'll either work. They're good. They're good to just go to the gym and get really buff and they're good. Or it won't. And then they will be convinced that they need to do this thing. Often it opens up that relapse can open up that window of willingness to take those actions that I wasn't willing to take, because I really begin to see the true hopelessness of my dilemma. And so, yeah, that is the direction. If I'm working with somebody and they relapse, or if I'm coming back from a relapse, redouble spiritual activities. These 12 steps taken out of this book. Again, it does not take long to get well. A few weeks. Dr. Bob was sponsoring again in a few days. So don't you worry, it does not take long to get well. It says you need not remind him of this, so of his spiritual deficiency. So don't point, like especially a family member pointing it out. You got a little option, more options as a sponsor, a little more spiritual license to point those things out. It says cheer them up and ask how you can be still more helpful. It says the slightest sign, and that theme of helpful, right? Again, when I'm coming, and I believe me, I've worked some steps in Al-Anon, I qualify for Al-Anon. Well, what do I want to do? I want to fix, manage, save, control, cure. I forgot to tie in the 3 C's to that paragraph that I had read. I absolutely forgot to do that. It's that paragraph where it spoke about, like, this is an illness over which no human power could have, and that's where it ties into that. I didn't cause it. I can't cure it. I can't change it. It's out of my hands. Oh, we're going to see whose hands it needs to be in. God's hands. We're going to see that in a sec. Sorry, all over the place. But that line of being helpful. See, I would show up to life. I would show up to human beings. I would show up with my bags and buckets of codependency, and I would need to change them, cure them, fix them, save them. That cape, right? I'd have to put that on, and and I can't. I have no more power over anyone else's illness, their alcoholism, their codependency, their anything that I do my own. I can't use willpower on it. where I use that willpower to do these actions of these 12 steps that I don't want to do. And the change happens to me. So that's that idea. How can I help? Not fix, not manage, not save, not control, not do what I say so I get a little ounce of value and worth. No, how can I help you on this spiritual journey? So it says the slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. And when we talk about that fear or tolerance, we spoke about that in, again, the chapter working with others, where it's like, hey, like, we know trying to shield somebody from temptation, that doesn't work. Trying to avoid motion pictures which show drinking scenes, that does not work, right? And it says the slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs, so he will not be tempted, will be noticed. Has any of us ever had people in our lives try to guide our affairs? We notice it immediately. Immediately I notice it, right? And then immediately I get resentful. Don't tell me what to do. I'm about to do the opposite, right? That's how I do. And it says, make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. This is important. If he gets drunk, oh, the 3C tie in here. If he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. This is the line. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. God is the one that does the removing. I take the spiritual actions and God relieves me of the mental obsession. How does that happen? God treats that spiritual malady, that hole in the depth of my soul. When that pain that I feel when I'm sober is eased, I don't have that insane thought that tells me I can drink again, I can use again. And if I don't have that thought, I wouldn't do that because that would be insane. And so I don't trigger the allergy. God, a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, that is our solution. So God either has removed our husband's liquor problem or our liquor problem, or he has not. It's black and white, black and white. If not, it had better be found out right away. Then your husband can get right down to fundamentals. What are these fundamentals? These 12 steps, these spiritual actions. Again, very simply, a relapse, yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Often it will cut away the denial and the delusion that I have to think that I don't have to do this thing. And then it says, if a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem along with everything else in God's hands. God's hands. No worries. Thank you so much for zooming in. Yeah. And I love the metaphors of God's hands. Right. And I'll joke, anyone ever here been told that you're a handful? Maybe it's because I need to be in God's hands. And then we see that theme throughout the book, right? What seemed at first a flimsy reed has proved to be the loving and powerful hand of God. We see the gentleman in step 9 who, didn't want to get honest about, he didn't want to get honest about stealing the money and ruining the reputation of his rival, but he saw that he had to place the outcome in God's hands. Page 100, we realize the things which came to us when we put ourselves in God's hands were better than anything we could have imagined. In 124, we're going to see God's hands again. And that'll be my little segue into, I've done a lot of segues into our next chapter, the family afterward. But again, it talks about in God's hands. Spoilers, our dark past, in God's hands, principal asset. It's awesome. So we place it in God's hands. Then it says, we realize we have been giving you much direction and advice. We may have seemed to lecture. If that is so, we are sorry, for we ourselves don't always care for people who lecture us. But what we have related is based upon experience. And this book is an experience-based textbook. Some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we are anxious that you understand and avoid these unnecessary difficulties. And it goes on to talk about, hey, Al-Anon family groups. So if you are interested, or if this applies to you, check out Al-Anon family groups. Al-Anon is for anyone who has been affected by alcoholism, whether in a family member, a friend, or you don't even have to have met the alcoholic to be affected by the alcoholism. And yes, what we will tell you what we have done on page 20, not what we think is a good idea, not what we heard somebody else say, but what we have done. This is based on our experience. And it says, now we're going to finish up this chapter, then we're going to bounce around to page 573. So it says, to those out there who may soon be with us, we say good luck and God bless you. Let's wrap up by popping over to page 573, which is like, what? It's probably one of my more random bounce arounds. 573. And so it's right before the 12 concepts, if that's helpful in finding it in their book. 573. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It just, here's how you can get in touch with Alcoholics Anonymous. But if we go to the very bottom paragraph and then go one up. So bottom paragraph, one up. It says, should you be the relative or a friend of an alcoholic who shows no immediate interest in AA, it is suggested that you write Al-Anon family groups. And that's one of those things. I've been privileged to do a lot of helpline work, like answering the phones for fellowships. And so often it's the family members and the loved ones. And I'm grateful to have that experience to say, I hope you consider trying out some of these fellowships for family members. And I can share my experience. Not you have to go, but that I have gone and I found it helpful. And it can be helpful to find a place where we don't feel so alone. So yeah, next week we're gonna pop over to the family afterward. I am surprised I did so well at time. I thought we'd go over, but we went under. So I mean, if you're struggling with belief in a power of God, just know I went under time. So miracles do happen. So we'll kick off the family afterward next week. All right.